Hello, everyone, and welcome to the YouTube audiobook series for The Snake and the Rose, written by Abby Matthias. I am Abby Davis, and today I will be introducing Chapter 20, Muscular Magic. If you missed Chapter 19, please go back to the last video. There was quite a bit that unfolded there. And if you are all caught up and ready to go, we will continue on with Chapter 20, Muscular Magic.
As I was placed in Satan's office, he started to lean back in his chair with a disappointed look upon his face. I stood in the same spot and stance, like normal, as I waited for him to speak. However, he continued to sit and stare like a hawk, timing its attack. I was getting a little fed up with his charade and wanted to interrupt his thought process. Yet I decided to refuse that idea for the sake of my safety. So after about 5 minutes, he finally spoke.
Man, we really need some action, don't we?
I glared at him in confusion as I replied with, "What do you mean, action?"
I mean, action. Nasty action.
Upon that comment, I got grossed out understanding what he meant. Despite how disturbing that was, I still kept my ground and displayed a blank face. If you need that kind of action, just go to one of your 8 wives. They'll do as you request. I recommended to end the conversation. However, he wasn't satisfied with that answer.
I mean, I could. But it gets boring after a while. You start craving something more after some time has passed.
After that statement, I stood there disgusted out of my mind. He would willingly cheat on his 8 wives for a new pleasure toy. Shows how much of a devoted husband he was. Yet my brain started to focus more on the gears in his head turning rather than his statement. After a brief moment, his eyes suddenly widened, and I knew he had an awful idea.
I know exactly how to make things interesting,
he said with an evil smirk. With that out in the open, he snapped his fingers and a human was abruptly teleported into the room with us. However, the human that was present was Abby. She became frightened like any human would if they were randomly teleported to hell and saw 2 demons standing across from them. My body filled with shock and panic as she began to freak out.
What? Darius, what's going on? Why am I here?
Upon her confusion, Satan stood up out of his chair and made his way to her. Before he could make it to her, though, I tried to navigate and get in front of him, but somehow my feet felt glued to the spot, unable to advance. She tried moving away, but he had her physically pinned against the wall by holding her wrists and lifting them above her head. Once she was stuck, he turned to touch her face, and she flinched away from him.
There's no need to be afraid. How can you resist a handsome man such as me?
And with that, he licked her from the bottom of her neck to her cheek along the right side. As he continued with his sexual harassment, Abby began to whimper.
I know. Exciting, right?
She violently shook her head no, and he grabbed her chin to keep it still. After that, he lifted her chin to face him as he leaned in for a kiss. "Don't!" I shouted before anything happened. He turned his head and gave me an evil glare with his furious eyes as I continued to plead. "You don't want to do anything with her. She's just a human that can't give you much. Plus, if she gets pregnant, that's some complicated problems you don't want to get tangled up with." He reflected upon the words that came out of my mouth and glanced at Abby. She kept hyperventilating in terror as they made eye contact for a minute, but afterwards, he released his grip, setting her free. However, he turned his body back to me as he grew frustrated with that horrific fact.
Then what do you suggest?
He said, placing himself in front of me. I knew what I had to do, yet I didn't want to. It was gross and uncomfortable to think about. But if this was how I was going to save Abby from having sex with the devil, I was going to sacrifice myself in order to do so. With that plan in mind, I used my shapeshift power to change myself into Darla. As he realized the gender change, he glared at me with lust and bit his lip. Along with that, he grabbed my waist and thrusted me into him. I turned my head to the side in disgust and shame for what was about to happen. I heard Abby call my name in fear, and my eyes met hers. I could see she was terrified, and I instructed her on what to do.
Please don't look. Turn away, Abby.
As she did so, also plugging her ears, Satan grabbed my chin and jerked my head forcefully to him again. And with one brief second, we locked eyes, and he kissed me right on the lips. I felt the slobbery beast upon my mouth as I wanted to throw up and crawl out of my own skin. But just as quick as a flash, I woke up violently within my bed as I heard pounding coming from my door. I quickly brought myself back to reality and got myself up to answer the rhythmic beating, trying to disregard the heavy breathing from my nightmare. Upon a slight examination of myself within the mirror, I saw I was still in my formal clothes and that my shirt was back to normal. The buttons were attached and the shirt was sewn back to its original design. I found it odd how the clothes didn't hang themselves up within my closet while I was asleep, though. However, that was the least of my concerns at this point. So knowing I was dressed and proper, I walked over to the door and unlocked it to see who was knocking. Upon the opening of it, I saw a shorter demon wearing butler-like clothes with an orange skin tone. I recognized him as being one of Satan's servants from the castle, and knew he wasn't going to have anything nice to say.
Darius, the Dark Lord wants to see you pronto.
He said. Of course he does, I said, giving a sigh at the end. Fine. Show me to him. And we left my house to visit the bastard in his palace. As we walked, I couldn't help but think about my day and the dream I just had. My chaotic day, in summary, was gaining a collar, being forced to become a woman, walking around in the human world pretending to be someone I wasn't, being sexually violated and harassed, becoming a male again, and somehow gaining 2 powers without trying to. The power of shapeshifting may be cool to other demons, but it didn't thrill me one bit. I didn't see how the ability to change into a woman would benefit me in the slightest. All the power did was make me feel out of place and insecure about myself. It was almost torture after almost spending a full human day as the opposite sex. Why would I switch into that form willingly? Even if it came down to a situation like I had in my nightmare, I don't know if I would be willing to do such a thing. Then, remembering that I was on my way to Satan, I thought about how the dream could have been some sort of vision. Yet I wasn't sure. That never happened before, but I couldn't assume anything at this point. So I started growing fearful of the future encounter and hoped it wasn't going to be a repeat of sexual activity. When we made it back to Satan's office on the 5th floor, the ruler stood at the window looking down upon his kingdom. As the servant man left the room, I presented myself in my normal stance with perfect posture as my hands were placed behind my back. I knew if I wouldn't have stood proper, he would scold at me first before starting the actual conversation. It was a mandatory action others needed to take in the presence of royalty. So as I stood silent, the door closed tight, and Satan immediately spoke.
That was quite the facade you put on for Abby, huh?
I stared at him as I became puzzled by his question and said, "What are you talking about?"
I'm talking about when you came down here the first time earlier within the day to save your precious human. You were acting different in front of her instead of showing your true colors.
Those were my true colors. I had every intention to save her from your rage. Upon my statement, he turned himself around to face me, his eyes hyper-focused as they met mine, and his fist clenched tightly, expressing his growing rage.
So you were serious when you made your decision?
He said, referring to the awful choice of killing Abby or not. Yes, I was. I don't get why you can't understand that. At that moment, he huffed a sigh of frustration and pinched the bridge of his nose to keep himself composed.
Darius, I'm gonna ask you this once. Why are you not taking her body for yourself?
He asked, sort of softly, as if he was defeated. Because it's not my body, and I don't want it to be. Why would I want a 20-year-old female body when I am an older male?
So you can be free from the likes of me. That's all you ever wanted since the day your demon life began. Plus, you know what they say. Girls just want to have fun.
I stared at him with aggression as I reflected upon that comment. The first part of his statement was true, but that doesn't mean I was willing to be a female to get away or kill an innocent person to obtain a body again. So I responded with, well, this man isn't going to be a woman and isn't going to have fun, so just drop it. After confirming my choice, Satan started firing verbal shots as his patience thinned.
Any other demon would take her body within a second flat. They would take advantage of this situation and be delighted to take her life. Do you understand this? That way they can actually have a little fun and experience human sexual pleasure.
Shut your mouth! You don't talk about such profound actions involving her body like that.
And why not? You can't tell me that she doesn't do things like that in front of you. Abby seems like the kind of girl to—
You keep her name out of your mouth! I shouted, reaching my limit. I haven't seen a damn thing involving sexual activity, and I most certainly don't plan to. I respect her privacy and her body, unlike any other sex addicts living in this hell-forsaken society. You don't own her in any way, shape, or form, and it is none of your business. Upon my declaration, I started to clench my hands tightly behind my back, trying to hide my anger. I was livid at the accusations he was making. He should know by now that I am not like the rest of the protector demons. It is impractical and immoral to take someone's life, especially if they are innocent. There was a reason why hell was the place to raise criminals, but I still remained unmoved from my original morals and ethics. As my anger level continued to rise, I also felt a strange tightness spread and travel up my arm. Without physically expressing my confusion, I kept my thoughts and feelings to myself as I released the tension in my hand. Without moving again, I felt the tightness continue on and begin to spread to my stomach and chest. It was like my muscles were starting to firm and bulk themselves up without the muscular activity. As I reflected upon it a little, I had a sudden memory pop into my head. My mind recalled the muscle growth episode I had in front of Abby earlier and realized the same thing was happening. However, I had to stop it quick so Satan didn't get any weird ideas upon the sight of them. Luckily, I also recalled Abby's statement on how this was caused by my anger level somehow, and I was beyond pissed at this point. So with that in mind, I knew I had to try and keep myself calm. So as I was trying to take deep breaths, Satan came closer to look me dead in the face.
And why should I listen to you? According to your collar, you're my pet. You should be listening to me, your master.
And he grabbed a hold of my collar and yanked me closer to him. I grunted in distress as he did that and felt even more disgusted towards him. It was like he was trying to make me uncomfortable and explode because of the sexual-like acts he was making towards me. But despite that, I stood my ground and kept my aggressive face displayed and steadied my breathing to visually show I wasn't bending to his persuasion. I didn't want him knowing about the muscle growth and made sure to keep my anger level at a minimal by focusing on my acting. I had calmed myself enough to ensure my muscles wouldn't grow any further. Now, I just had to worry about pretending to be pissed to fool this dummy of an overlord. So I continued to stay silent and allowed him to press on with his problematic behavior.
Wow, you actually shut your trap. I knew you could do it. Who's a good boy?
He antagonized. After that remark, he pushed me back, letting go of my collar. I straightened myself back up again and listened to his next question.
How long has it been since you've became a protector demon? I know it has been about 3 demon months, but you would know in human time.
It's been a little over a month.
Good. You are still in the beginning stages. You'll continue to gain powers and evolve as time goes on, seeing how you started with no abilities. Keep track of that, and I'll be seeing you again real soon. You're dismissed.
And he waved his hand towards me, signaling my dismissal. Upon that action, I turned myself around happily and exited the office to make my way back home. As I weaved through Devilish Square again, I grew thankful that the dream I had was just some twisted up nightmare rather than a vision. I still didn't like the interaction I had with Satan, but it could have been a lot worse. Along with that, I also grew thankful that he didn't notice the muscle growth I was spontaneously having. It must not have been enough for him to notice, or he was just that oblivious to it. I didn't know what this power exactly was or what it meant, but I was going to try and figure it out for both mine and Abby's sake. Once I made it back home, I immediately made myself an alcoholic drink and sat down at my desk, trying to relax. I couldn't help but let my thoughts swirl within my head as I leaned myself onto the desktop. My brain recalled the conversation with Satan and how he pulled me into his office for a third time to make certain of my decision to protect Abby. Yet upon my reflection, I started to question my choice I made. Was I really about to flip my world upside down for a kid I barely knew? Was I seriously about to throw away my opportunity to live again and break my bond to Satan for some girl that clashes with me almost all the time? If I was truly making this choice to protect her, was I prepared to go through any other physical changes and adapt to any new powers that came with it? Even though he talked nonsense most of the time, Satan had a point with me starting out with no powers at all. I didn't know why I gained the powers I already had in the first place. And I was currently in the beginning stages of this evolution. Was this the life I wanted to form, knowing it still has Satan in the picture? Well, it may seem like one of the worst decisions in my mind, but I knew in the long run I was making the right choice and hoping that one day it would be beneficial to me. Abby was young, intelligent, kind, when she wanted to be, and has high potential for success in life. I could see the hidden qualities that she had regardless on how poor our current bond was. Just because I didn't know that much about her didn't mean I would outright steal her life. If I would have said yes, it would have been considered a twisted form of murder. That's not what I want, and it goes against my morals and ethics. Everything I have learned while growing up and everything I taught myself would have been shattered into pieces and consumed by the monster I appeared to be. That would make me no better than any other demon in hell and categorize me into the stereotype of being a true demon. At that exact thought, I had a shiver come up my spine as I started to feel disgusted with myself. I never wanted to be a fellow man within Hell's society and fit in with the rest of them. So I consumed a large amount of my drink to solidify my decision and averted my thoughts to a different topic. I ended up glancing down at myself to find my fingers fidgeting with each other. That always seemed to happen when I was in deep thought. I knew deep down it was one of my nervous tics if I reflected too much about myself and my past. Yet, it mainly happened when I was by myself. But I disregarded that as my gaze traveled up my forearm. I saw that it was back to its original size and shape rather than taking the new form it could have had. I somewhat understood why it didn't as I recognized the feeling of neutrality flowing through my body. However, I still wanted to test that theory and make sure it was right rather than assuming it. Before standing up, I finished my drink with one last swig, placed the glass back down on the desk, and closed my curtains in case of visitors or peeping toms wanting to stop by. Once I was fully standing, I turned myself to my closet and began to walk over to the mirror. Standing in front of it, I saw myself wearing my red textured shirt and black formal pants. My black hair was tamed, and my piercing red eyes were staring at my normal-sized body. However, I didn't want to wreck my freshly mended clothes with this unknown feature. So before I tested anything, I unbuttoned and hung up my shirt before it got wrecked again. Though as I was doing so, I decided to take off my pants as well to expose everything except my private areas that were still covered by my boxers. If this muscle growth happened to the upper half of my body, I wanted to see if it affected my lower half. Once everything was hung up and properly in their places, I closed the closet doors to reveal the mirror again. Staring at the reflection, I thoroughly examined every part of my body and made sure to take note of my muscle mass before continuing with the experiment. I wanted to take note of the differences between the two forms and see the changes with each of them. So once I completed my beginning analysis, I closed my eyes and began thinking about something to aggravate me. As I focused, I allowed my mind to roam freely on its own. The first thought that came to it was the different negative qualities Abby had that made this partnership difficult. The stubbornness and her lackness to try and understand things drove me nuts sometimes. Whenever I tried explaining something, she would let her emotions get the best of her. She allows her feelings to get in the way of her listening to what I have to say. Then on top of that, she would never change her mind on things. She wasn't open-minded or optimistic. The best example of that would be when she first met me. She didn't even try to accept the fact that I wasn't the stereotypical demon. She held her prejudice against me and thought everything I did was a crime. I was sent to protect her, but she wouldn't allow that information to process and acknowledge my words. And upon those thoughts, I opened my eyes to my muscles shifting and growing at a slow pace. Analyzing the growth compared to my feelings, it felt like it did correspond with each other. It was somewhat based on my anger level. So, upon those results, I started to think about Satan himself to raise that level of anger. I recalled the annoyance he always had in his voice and his arrogance he displayed to others. His fiery eyes that could make someone feel the irritation of burning with just a glare. His selfishness and childish actions that was acceptable to society even though he was a higher figure within it. I couldn't believe how a man like him was anointed to such an important and powerful position. As I felt the anger rising, my eyes glanced down at myself and still saw my muscles growing at the same slow rate. Each kind of muscle was starting to protrude upon my body. However, they still were not the same size as when I was with Abby. Realizing this fact made me grow surprised at the results. Satan was the top person to piss me off the most, but yet somehow the muscle growth wasn't acting up as much. I couldn't quite understand why that didn't make the muscles grow drastically, but I didn't lose hope quite yet. I wanted to try another tactic that would hopefully make more of a difference. so I closed my eyes again to concentrate on my thoughts. As much as I didn't want to, I decided to think about the dream I had before Satan's servant knocked upon my door. I focused on how he called me into his office to talk about needing some action. Out of all of the people in hell, he chose me to speak to about it. He showed his willingness to cheat on his 8 wives, and he had the nerve to bring Abby down. The frightened face she expressed made the sad feeling in my chest grow. However, the way he pinned her against the wall and made her helpless washed away that feeling and fueled my anger again. Everything that monster did to make her frightened made my eyes and mouth clench in frustration. Then within an instant, my brain traveled off and started imagining its own ending. It suddenly had Abby staring at me with fright as her brown eyes looked right through me. Yet she could only look at me for a few seconds before Satan grabbed her chin and held it in front of him. He stared down at her with lust and longing, trying to lean in for a kiss. But Abby kneed him in defense, which just made her more desirable in his eyes. He displayed his evil smirk and used his power to spread and pin her legs apart. As Abby was helplessly against the wall, Satan took his hand and brought it to her shirt. He hooked his long nail claw onto it and started to rip it open. As that was happening, she started breathing heavily and started whimpering in distress again.
Don't struggle. It'll only make it worse,
he said, disregarding her sadness. And within that moment, as he continued ripping, she started to scream in fear. The scream sent me into a panic and aggressive mode as I shouted, raising my arm. Back the fuck off! And I quickly opened my eyes to reveal quite a sight. For the view I took in now was foreign and somewhat alarming to me. I saw the very beast that I could become within a matter of seconds. The mirror showed a very muscular man with magenta and red skin. Every part of his body was bulging with brawn from head to toe. His calves, thighs, stomach, chest, biceps, triceps, and forearms were all intimidating to look at. But not only was he muscular, he also had a force field around him. Looking at the face, he expressed pure aggression, and his teeth were showing as they were clenched together. His beady eyes glaring back at me and displaying shimmering red flames moving from within them. As I gazed at this man, I grasped at the idea that this was who I would be if I didn't contain my anger, and that's where the alarm came in. How was this even possible? How could someone have this kind of power? And what was the significance of it? How was it supposed to help me? If it only could be used when I became angry, wouldn't that make me destructive instead of protective? Upon those questions, the feeling of panic rose within me again. I brought my arms up and started to clench my hands to view my forearms. I could see veins popping out and displaying outlines on my skin. As I kept watching, I started to feel like a monster and realized how much of a danger this could be. The muscles acted upon defensive feelings more rather than anger. If it was based on that, I was going to struggle tremendously with it. I felt nothing but anger towards Satan, and I was extremely defensive for some reason when it came to Abby. I understand that I didn't want any demonic shit happening to her. However, I didn't wish that upon anyone else. No one should have to go through what I did or currently do. As my thoughts came to a close, I quickly ran to my desk in search for answers. This beast of a demon almost scared me, but it made me more nervous, if anything. I wanted to know why this was happening and what it meant. There had to be some sort of information written in the Protector Demon book, or the power book that I had. So I started there as I sifted through the first book about Protector Demons. I kept trying to search for keywords such as muscle, growth, expand, emotions, etc. Anything that could possibly relate to it. Unfortunately, though, I couldn't find anything. I tossed that book to the side and sifted through the Powers book, still desperate to find answers. Yet again, I was greeted with nothing, and the outcome remained the same. At that moment, I became flabbergasted and stunned. I didn't know what to do, or where to go, to be quite honest. The bookstore barely had any books within it, and it was already hard enough to find the books that I had. I didn't want to go to the library because of the judgment I would have gotten, and I didn't want anyone snooping at what I was reading. I didn't need any false rumors being spread and get myself in trouble with Satan. Even though it was a place I could maybe find something, it was the place where the most demons got criticized for what they were researching. So sadly, that option was out. There was no way I was going to go and ask my ruler about it either. He would find a way to sexualize the topic, and I certainly didn't want to go down that route. Now, I couldn't do anything to help myself. This was something I had to learn and observe along the way. Unexpectedly, it was my turn to face this change and walk through the dark, unknowing of what kind of power I obtained that no one knew nothing about.
This has been Chapter 20, Muscular Magic, from the book The Snake in the Rose. Tune into the next video for Chapter 21. Thank you for listening.